Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to another video. Today we're talking about points. That's right, the update has come out a couple of days ago, and it is time to quickly go over the winners and losers of points. We'll start off with our first faction, Cities of Sigmar, who overall kind of are middling in terms of changes. We've got a couple of changes to some of their more niche heroes, which is nothing to write home about. We've also seen some changes to their less taken and more unpopular units as well, such as the Charybdis, the Luminarch, and the War Hydra. These all dropped by 10s and 20s. While, yes, I think that that's interesting as a whole, I don't think it's interesting enough to warrant people taking these. I think there's a very clear, cut and dry list currently, sort of direction being pushed by this book, and it doesn't have those people in it. I'm honestly surprised that Callus and Cold didn't get changed, but nevertheless, overall, we haven't really seen anything to write home about with cities. So overall, I would say they're about a 5 out of 10 in terms of changes. Nothing crazy, but nothing bad either. Next up, we've got Daughters of Cain. We've seen some changes here as well, which are pretty interesting. The Crone Seer got her drop as well, so we might actually start seeing the Crone Seer at 170. Bloodrack Shrine got a tiny drop. Avatar of Cain got a pretty significant 30-point drop, which is cool. We might start seeing him a bit more as well. Life Takers are now quite competitively priced against Heartrenders. Sisters of Slaughter and Witch Elves have also seen a little bit of a drop, so the Witch Elf list might come back in full force very, very soon, especially with the Crone Seer, especially with the Bloodrack Shrine, and especially with those smaller elf units dropping in points. You could see a lot more on the table. It seems like they basically just fully buffed that package as a whole within the army. It's interesting to see the Avatar of Cain drop as well. I think that could be a really cool unit to see back on the table after quite a while. Overall, though, I'd say that's a pretty big thumbs up from me. 7 out of 10. I think that this could be a bit better, but it also could be a lot worse. So I'm glad to see that a middle of the ground army just got internal balanced rather than externally balanced as a relationship to the rest of the game. So overall, pretty positive. Next up, Fire Slayers. We don't see many changes here, and honestly, I'm kind of sad about it. These guys, again, are pretty middling in terms of their performance right now, and seeing only their heroes drop is pretty wild. Ironically enough, the Doomseeker and the Grimhold Exile, as well as the Grimwrath Berserker, have been seeing a little bit of play in some degree of spamming lists, specifically those Doomseekers and Grimwrath Berserkers. So Doomseekers dropping 20 points might be a big deal. Other than that, though, the heroes dropping is kind of interesting, but nothing too crazy. So hopefully we'll see something more improved very, very soon, as these guys aren't winning too many games. As a whole, I would say this is about a 4 out of 10. Next up, Idoneth Deepkin. This is pretty big, actually. So Idoneth Deepkin had their Achillean King, their Thrallmaster, an Eidolon, a Soul Render, and Lotan all drop, which are genuinely interesting picks. We've also seen Alpexes, one of the more devastating units to be taken in the game right now, as well as the Leviathan and the Thralls all be dropped. This might be enough to get an extra unit, considering the amount of Alapexes, Leviathans, and heroes that the Namadi have been, that the Idoneth have been taking. Like, the genuinely large amounts of reductions here could affect how many units these guys can take, which could positively affect their win rate. So overall, I'm going to say a definite 7 out of 10 for these guys. Well done. I think it'll be a really interesting choice. I'm glad that none of the eels were changed, and I'm glad that we haven't seen any changes to some of the more popular heroes either. I think that's really good, because it means that we're not getting any nerfs when they're not necessarily performing super crazy. But this might push them out of that mid tier and up a bit. So 7 out of 10. Next up, Caradron Overlords. This is a awesome change to see. I love these changes. Caradron Overlords were one of the worst factions in the game, arguably with one major gimmick. Luckily for us KO players, that gimmick has not been removed from the game, and instead we have been rewarded with some points changes. And boy, howdy, is this not a fantastic set of points changes. The melee package with Brock has dropped, so Brock is now 20 points cheaper. Sky Wardens and Engine Riggers are also 10 points cheaper. I would have liked to have seen Sky Wardens drop 20 or maybe even 30, as engine riggers are just better in every way. But nevertheless, they did drop. They did see a points reduction. I think it's a positive nonetheless. The Chemist dropping by 10, Arcanaut dropping by 10, and the Gun Hauler dropping by 10 is also fantastic to see. The Chemist is honestly not as effective as he used to be, thanks to the fact that he has a 3-up roll to make on his buff. But it is good to see Arcanaut Company getting a little bit more competitively priced, and I think the Gunstock Gun Hauler dropping by 20 is quite good. I think it's a start to what needs to probably drop by another 20 in another 3 months, but nevertheless, super positive changes all around. Dreki isn't really too influential, but I have seen a couple of people take him. I think the code right overall is relatively useless. So I think just in general, this is at the very least a very good start. So 8 out of 10, almost perfect changes. Would like to have just seen a little bit more on the Sky Wardens and the Gun Haulers in particular, as well as maybe Brock. But nonetheless, big ups for KO. Next up, Lumineth, and this is our first increase that we've seen. So let's get started on the decreases first of all, with the Hurricane Windmage, the Cathalar, and the Lore Seeker all seeing drops, as well as the Starshard Ballista. I have seen the Cathalar being taken already, and the Lore Seeker being taken already at times, but very, very niche. The Windmage has seen some play as well, so I can't say for sure if this is really going to impact anything. I think overall there are just so many better units like the Caligrave, like the Enlightener, like the Twins, that people are probably still not going to take these. The big ones to look out for, though, is the fact that Archmage tech list did not change, the Twins did not change. These are going to be really, really important units, I'm sure, in future lists. Nevertheless, though, what did change was the Enlightener and the Caligrave going up by 10. I think that this is understandable, but also probably in combination with the changes to manifestations, maybe something actually relevant. I know 10 points doesn't seem like a lot, but with the external changes, I think that this is relatively reasonable. As for units, we've got the Spirit of the Wind getting changed by 10 points. This isn't probably enough. We do see 2 in a lot of lists these days, but I still don't think it's quite there. The wind charges, however, going up by 20 is incredible. It means that we won't see 2 wind spirits plus 30 of these Huracan wind charges, which is nice, but we also won't see an absolute boatload of people taking them just for side objectives. Thinking of side objectives as well, the River Blades have changed by 20 points. Overall, these units going up is really positive for the game. They were carrying a lot of lists. Dawn Riders going up as well, same thing, they were carrying so many lists. Making them a bit more of an opportunity cost is nice. I would have liked to have seen Blade Lords stay the same. I don't think they're too egregious, but nevertheless, there is still quite a lot of things in the Lumineth book that are insanely good. Again, like I said, Techless, Sentinels, Stone Guard are fantastic as well, something that we haven't seen change, so look out for those. Stay vigilant. I think that Lumineth are overall a fantastic army still, but I think as a balance, not just internally but externally, this is a massive positive 9 out of 10 change. Well done, GW. Next up, Seraphon. Seraphon's got quite a lot of units, but we're all good. We've seen a small change to a couple of their heroes, specifically the Monster Mash Stegodon Chief getting dropped by 20. We've seen Pterodon and Ripper Chiefs dropping by 20 as well. these still aren't probably enough to ever be taken. Saurus Old Blood dropped, don't see him ever getting taken either. Lord Croak dropping by 30 is interesting, and I would love to see Lord Croak being played again, but we don't really know for sure. Scarvet Agrodon has gone up by 10, and also Skink Starseer has gone up by 10. Not surprised considering how good these two units are for the army. 10 points, though, is relatively nothing. As for units, Agrodon Lance is going up by 10. This, again, really makes the Agrodon package only go up by 30 points because you're only taking 6 Agrodon Lances and 1 Scarvet usually. But we do see a boatload of drops here with the Monster Mash getting dropped. All your monsters are getting dropped, which is really, really fantastic. Skinks and the Pterodons and the Rippers are all seeing a little bit of a drop here as well. Nothing that I would say makes them competitively viable enough to compare to the heavy-hitting units. However, we have seen Terrawings drop, making them a potentially good choice, if only for Hunters of Hornsea not being dropped. If Hunters of Hornsea got increased, I think Terrawings would be the new big bad in terms of units being taken, but Hunters are just so incredibly good for points value. Croxagore are so incredibly good for points value. Raptidon Charges are so incredibly good for points value. I just don't see anyone staying away from those units. As for Agrodon Lancers, I still think that they're viable, and I still think that you'll see people take them. So overall, probably like a 5 out of 10 for these guys getting changes. I think seeing an internal balance change here is relatively good. Monster Mash is getting some big ups. I wish to have seen Hunters go up a little bit, though. Nonetheless, relatively positive, but nothing major enough to think that I would see any changes to the list building archetypes here. So, 5 out of 10. Last but not least, Stormcast with only 2 hero changes, I believe. No, we've got more here. So Ionis and Karazai dropping by 20. Again, I think that Karazai was already getting taken a bunch. Ionis getting dropped by 20 doesn't really make him relevant enough as of yet. Lord Imperator dropping by 10. Still nothing too crazy, but pairing up with the Annihilators that drop by 10 as well makes the Annihilator package quite nice. You could technically run anywhere between 6 and 12, even maybe 18 Annihilators with this guy, so that going down by like 70 points at a maximum is somewhat interesting. Other than that, though, we've seen middling changes for a bunch of heroes that don't get taken, so overall, for the heroes, nothing to write home about. We've seen Concussors drop by 20, which is pretty insane considering they're objectively better Fulminators, and yet here Fulminators stay the same. I would have liked to have seen them also drop by 20. I think it only makes sense that we compare all 3 of them as relatively the same amount of damage output outside of Concussors being slightly more. Tempestors need to drop way more than 20 though. They are still very, very bad. Liberators getting more competitively viable. Still don't think that it's enough. They're an absolute anvil and that's about it. And require you to take a very mediocre sub-faction in order to do so. So I don't see much going on there. Reclusians dropping by 10, again, is really nice, as I've seen 6 get taken a lot, but it's still not enough. Stormdrake Guard dropping by 20 is cool, but again, I don't think it's quite enough. Hunters, Chariots, and Vigilors all dropping by a mediocre amount of points. This might make you take one of these units here or there in a less competitively viable army, but overall I think Stormcast got a 4 out of 10 change, with nothing really changing here in terms of internal balance, and nothing really changing in terms of external balance, outside of people spamming Concussors because they're objectively better. Next up, Sylvaneth. Sylvaneth got the Archrev, Dryarcher, Treelord Ancient, and Warsong Revenant all dropping, with Belthanos going up by 20. Belthanos was always taken, so it makes sense. Other than that, though, the Archrev, the Warsong, and the Tree Lords getting dropped is nothing to really write home about. I think as a general statement, this doesn't change anything. So, 2 out of 10. could have done so much more here. I think overall, nothing's changed for list building with Sylvaneth. Next up, Beasts of Chaos. I'm going to skip these guys as they are currently getting removed from the game anyway. We'll go straight to Blades of Corn, who saw a lot of green for not a lot of payout. And I'll explain why. Basically, we've seen a bunch of the mortal heroes drop, as well as Karanak drop down and Scarbrand drop down in points by about 20. All of these heroes were kind of just not taken, and it's trying its best to make the Bloodbound hero spam list viable. Whether or not this does that job, I honestly can't tell you. It might allow you to squeeze in one more hero with some of these points cost drops here, but overall, the things that needed to drop were the Bloodthirsters for sure. They're way too expensive. I think everyone wants to just see more points drops on them. So this is a mid-tier army that looks like those hero changes are going to keep it still at a mid-tier army, as you're not spamming too many heroes at the moment anyway. As for units, though, we've seen a little bit of a drop on the Skull Crushers, the Skull Cannon, the Wrathmongers, the Korgoroths, and the Claws of Karanak, sorry. The Claws of Karanak and all that sort of stuff getting dropped, again, don't really do anything for this army outside of maybe the Skull Crushers and maybe the Wrathmongers giving you a 40-point drop in your list. Again, this might add up to one unit getting added to your army. Whether or not that's incredibly useful to you is a whole nother story. So overall, 3 out of 10. We got Disciples of Tzeentch with a couple of changes to their heroes and a couple of increases as well. We've seen pink horrors and blue horrors go up. I think overall these things are still insanely immortal and insanely tanky. So as a whole, I don't think this does anything to them. Lords of Change going up by 20 doesn't really do much either. I think that you're probably only going to see Tzeentch list go up by 40 points exactly, because it's only usually 2 of one of these 2 units and 1 Lord of Change in a list anyway. Jade Obelisks going down, Karak Acolytes going down to make them more competitively viable doesn't really seem to be doing too much because it's only by 10 points. As for all these heroes, I don't quite know why they dropped the Changeling. I've seen the Changeling getting taken quite a lot. I've also seen the Curseling getting taken every now and then. So it's a bit strange on those drops. Could just end up mitigating some of the nerfs that they've just implemented. But regardless, these changes don't seem to change the army in any way. But it also doesn't seem to be impacting some of the stronger units in the army either, like Flamers of Tzeentch and Enlightened / Skyfires getting taken a lot. So as a whole, 3 out of 10. I think they could have done a little bit better to make some of the other unique units in this army more playable, like base Zangors and other fun stuff like the Zangor Shaman. But it is a start, it is an attempt, so 3 out of 10. We'll move on. Next up, Hedon Knights of Slaanesh. They're getting changed with not a whole lot. Blissbarb Archers going up, Slickbait Seekers going up. I don't see these units much anyway, so it's kind of strange that they went up. I don't think they're super impactful. Fiend Bloods, Chariots, and Hellflayers all going down is cool, but as a whole, I don't think that the Chariot spam list is anything to write home about, and Fiend Bloods are definitely nothing to write home about either. The heroes that dropped are nothing special. I think as a whole, this is a pretty big L, so I'm going to give it a 2 out of 10. Would like to have seen more. This army needs it. Next up, Maggotkin of Nurgle, seeing a bunch of points drops. Putrid Blight Kings going down by 10, Nurglings going down by 10. As for units, that's nothing too crazy, but if you're spamming Blight Kings like I do myself every now and then, this is a pretty positive change. The Glotkin needed to go down by way more than 20 points. Same thing with Rodigus. Other than that, though, the other heroes dropping is pretty cool, pretty interesting. It might see the Monster Mash list start to revitalize itself again, but I'm not 100% sure. Overall, 4 out of 10. These heroes aren't worth talking about. Skaven. This is a new book. So I'm surprised it got changes, but it did. And are they really that effective? From what I've seen, not really. These changes are pretty middling. They don't really seem to do much. Claw Lords getting dropped, the Vermin Lord Warbringer getting dropped, and a couple of Warlocks getting dropped by very irrelevant points. Clan Rats seeing some drops. Not many people were taking them as is, so this is just another mediocre change. Plague Claws and some more machines dropping as well doesn't really do anything for this army, so overall, 3 out of 10. Next up, Slaves to Darkness. These are the Neos of the Matrix when it comes to Age of Sigmar, because boy, have they dodged bullets. Furies and Chosen going up, the Demon Prince and Be'lakor going up. Be'lakor being one of the best, if not the best, War Scroll in the game. Still sitting at 440 is nuts to me. It is really, really good. The Demon Prince, honestly, going up by 10 means nothing. You're only taking one of them anyway. All of these points drops, like the Chaos Lord, the Centurion Marshal, and so on, are all pretty atrocious, with the only relevant one potentially being the Gaunt Summoner on disc for the fantastic teleporty shenanigans that can be done with him. As for the Chaos Chariots, the Dark Growth Wilderfiend, and the Fumaroid Crushers, I think you know why this is going to be a solid 2 out of 10, if not a 1 out of 10, considering we've seen no changes to some of their best units in a meaningful way, with Varangard going up by 10, Chosen only going up by 10, and Furies only going up by 10. Gore Beasts, these Mutaleth Vortex Beasts, the Slaughter Brood, the Therodons all dropping means absolutely nothing. I don't think you're going to see any of these units taken ever. So, definitely a 2 out of 10, if not a 1 out of 10, to be entirely honest. Next up, Feck. We're starting to get into the death, and we have no real major changes. Some drops to the dragons, which is quite nice. Means that we might be able to fit a couple more in eventually. We've seen some slight changes to these more mediocre heroes. The Ghoul King really needs to drop more. Honestly, a lot of these heroes could drop a little bit more. The Cardinal going up by a little bit is somewhat interesting, but nothing to write home about. 2 out of 10 for me. Needs more changes, especially to Crypt Flayers. Next up, Nighthorn, the big bads of the edition so far. We've seen Pyregeist get more effective, Script Mortis and Knight of Shrouds also get more effective. Would you take them? Answer is definitely not. Reikenor going up by 10, not surprised, he was incredibly effective. Bladegeists, Harridans, and Hexrays, the big bads, going up by a tiny amount. I think the Hexwraith change as a whole is the major one. You won't see 30 of these guys or 40 of these guys in a list now, maybe, but you'll definitely still see a shitload of Revenants and Harridans, so maybe not necessarily seeing 60 of them, maybe only seeing 40 of them now. Nevertheless, I think the changes to their actual Allegiance abilities were the bigger change here. A 70-point increase to some lists is nothing to really care too much about. Just drops a single unit down from one to something else. And considering there are plenty of smaller units that will still be great objective monkeys, like Glaive Wraith Stalkers, not getting changed and still being 80 points, means that that demotion in the unit cost is nothing to care about. So I'll say a 5 out of 10 could do with some more buffs and changes to some of the less used units like Craven Throne, Chain Rasps, and so on. Ossiarch Bone Reapers. We have seen nothing but drops, baby, and honestly, the only one that I've really seen here that I am surprised about is Vokmordian, who is an incredibly solid unit. But nevertheless, that's kind of about it in terms of changes that seem to be that relevant here. Mortek Crawlers dropping by 20 is cool, and they have seen a little bit of play recently, but Stalkers, Guard, and the Harvester have not seen much love. The Soul Reaper is very much so still overcosted. Same with the Bone Shaper and the Ossifector, so I'm going to give it a 2 out of 10. They've actually dropped one of their better units in the form of Crawler and Vokmordian, and didn't really do too much to change the way the army plays, so 2 out of 10. Soulblight coming in next. We've got a bunch of changes here, but honestly, nothing too crazy. A lot of on-foot heroes getting points reductions, as well as the Manfred getting pushed up a little bit. I don't think you'll see any of these units taken that got drops here in the Heroes tab, but Manfred going up by 20 is a little bit painful for all those Soul Blight players out there, I'm sure. As for units, Skurgan True Blades, Terrorgeists, Vargeists, and Zombie Dragons all going down in points is nothing to write home about. No one's probably going to run these bad boys, which is a bit of a shame considering the Skurgans are very cool models. Black Knights and Graveguard going up in points is devastating. Black Knights were incredibly effective. Graveguard also incredibly effective. Fellbats for 100 are still incredibly viable and still very much so going to be spammed, I'm sure, as objective monkeys. Bone Splitters got no change, and I'm skipping them. Gloomspite Gits, we've seen a little bit of changes. Scragrot going up, which is a bit sad, but Trog and the Trog boss going up along with the other Trog units of Rockguts and Fellwaters. I think the Trog list got a big hit. It's going to need to be mixed arms going forward. Nevertheless, this is a minor change that just pushes them away from the Oops All Trog list to the Oops All Trog list with a couple of squigs. So, as a whole, I think it's like a 4 out of 10. Would have liked to have seen some more buffs to the Arachnaroks, to some of the smaller units of Gloomspite, to see them getting taken a bit more as a fully fledged army rather than rocking only trolls and then backing them up with whatever fits the role of battle tactic monkey. Nevertheless, we shall move on. Iron Jaws got a bunch of drops. Do I think that they matter? Probably not. A lot of these units are not taken as is. Pretty much all the mega bosses are just ignored. We're only seeing War Chanters and Weird Knob Shamans lead armies at the moment. But these drops are kind of interestingly heavy drops, just not quite enough to really warrant it. I think that it is funny, though, that we can do the 5 mega boss list. I think that's pretty funny. But overall, something that I wouldn't recommend investing in, because there is a chance that they just go up in points to shit all over that list and make you waste $200. Brute Rages, Gore Grunters, and Weird Brute Wreckers going down probably gives the army 40 points at best. No one was taking Weird Brutes anyway, and the Brute Rages and Gore Grunters were taking a maximum of 6 per army each. So I think as a whole, 40 extra points to this army doesn't really do anything. So 2 out of 10. Cruel Boys getting a couple of drops. Gobsprak as well as Swamp Boss, their 2 named characters, dropping by 20. And then the Gnash Tooth dropping by 20 as well is interesting. Slogoth dropping by 20. I think this is just a nothing burger of a drop. 1 out of 10. Honestly, may as well not have dropped at all. Ogre Tribes. Boy. Look at what they did to my boy, dude. Look at how they massacred my boy. Bloodpelt Hunter, Frostlord, Huskard, all dropping by 20 and 40 respectively. Honestly, some of the most unplayable units in the book. The Butcher going up by 10, the Slaughtermaster going up by 10 is quite understandable. They were pretty undercosted. Very valid. Understand why that is. But the Tyrant not dropping is crazy. The fact that the Stonehorns didn't drop by even more than this is crazy. The Firebelly still being 140 points is crazy. Frost Sabers not going up, though, is super positive. We love that. Scrap Launcher, no one wants to run that anyway. May as well remove it from the game. Noblar's not going up by points is pretty amazing, too. Gorge and Morpack staying the same is a bit sad. I would have liked to have seen them drop to 250. Yetis need to be dropped to like 80 points because they're terrible, but they didn't, so bit of a thumbs down on that one. Iron Blaster needs to be dropped by a further 40 points at minimum, but it's definitely a start. Man-Eaters getting dropped means nothing. Iron Gut staying the same is pretty positive. Lead Belchers not dropping is pretty insane to me. I think they could drop by 20 to 30 points. Mornfang staying the same is again pretty crazy. They could easily drop by 40 points. Ogre Gluttons going up 30 points is one of the biggest knee-jerk reactions I've seen in this entire game. 30 points for Gluttons and only 10 for Vanguard is egregious. Only 20 for Hex Wraiths and Black Knights is insane that Ogre Gluttons went up by 30. I think that this could have easily been a 240 point unit, but nevertheless, here we are. So RIP my Ogre brethren. I hope that you all fare well in the changes. I know my list technically hasn't changed because I'm running Kragnos, but nevertheless, you guys out there might have experienced a world of pain if you're running a whole bunch of Gluttons. Overall, 1 out of 10 changes. They needed to balance this book internally and externally significantly more than they have. Next up, Sons of Behemat, which is the last army in the book, I believe. Yes, the last one. And we've seen absolutely no changes. 0 out of 10. One of the worst changes I've ever seen. That's where it ends. Thank you all for watching, dude. I really do appreciate it. We haven't seen any changes to the Regiments of Renown, honestly, which is pretty surprising to me. They're getting taken more and more these days. But nevertheless, I hope you enjoyed the video. Stay safe out there. We're going to be doing plenty more throughout the week. Come back, subscribe, join us over on Twitch if you want to come hang out. Much love to you all, and I will see you all very, very soon. Farewell.